You're listening to the Codependent Millennial Podcast with Sophie Shiloh, episode 29, Healing Emotional Burnout. Hello, my loves. Today we're going to talk about what emotional burnout is, how to tell if you have it, how we create it for ourselves, and what to do to heal it and prevent it in the future. I, of course, always recommend that you grab a pen and paper to do some reflection during this episode. The learning that's available to you here will truly change your life if you let it. Emotional burnout is something I am deeply familiar with. I have burnt myself out so extensively at various points in my life that I've been incapacitated and even hospitalized for exhaustion. I used to use relentless effort and hard work at my own expense as a marker of how worthy I was, be it in relationships with family members or romantic partners, in my career and in my business, with exercise, with eating patterns, all of it. Honestly, you name it. Like, if there was an element of my life that I could use against myself in that way, I did it. And I still do sometimes. I still experience the urge to define my worth and my legitimacy as a person by how much I sacrifice and suffer. Part of my daily self-coaching routine now includes getting aware of the ways in which I'm still doing this so that I can let them go and release them. Living in that way, living in a way where you measure your worth against how much you are suffering and struggling and sacrificing is extremely painful. So if you can relate to this at all, I just want to validate for you that this is an unbelievably painful way to live. And I also want to tell you that it's a choice. You don't have to live like this anymore. And that is what this episode is all about. So first, what is emotional burnout? Emotional burnout is when your energetic reserves have been depleted, either completely or to a significant extent that is noticeable and painful and causing problems in your life. Emotional burnout is when you've given and allowed others to take, so much so that you have nothing left. We're talking about emotional energy right now, but this also applies to money, to physical energy, to attention, to possessions in your life, and any other resources that you have. It's when your cup is empty. How do we know if we are in emotional burnout? Now, I could make a list, of 2,000 different indicators, 2,000 different ways to know if you're in emotional burnout, but I'm going to keep it short for now and just list several of the most common indicators here. If you're impatient with people that you really love, or with people in general, or with yourself. If you're having a really hard time accessing gratitude and joy. If you are exhausted. If you are angry. If you are sad and hopeless. If you are restless and anxious, but also can't really seem to focus or get anything done. If you worry a lot. If you wish someone would just come take care of you and all the other things that you have to do. If you feel suicidal, or if you wish something would happen to you so that you had to be hospitalized. If you want to quit everything. If you're not excited by things that usually excite you. If you don't want to take care of yourself. If you are in physical pain. If you're short of breath or breathing shallowly throughout the day and gritting your teeth. If no amount of sleep is ever enough. These are just a few examples, like I said, of indicators for you to know when you're in emotional burnout. I'm sure listening to this list, you're also able to identify other indicators for you personally of how this manifests in your life. So one of the ways that I'd like you to engage with this episode right now is to, on your own piece of paper or on your notes app or wherever you're listening to this, just write down, what are my indicators that I am in emotional burnout? What are my indicators that I have depleted all of my energetic reserves? Really observe what that answer is for you and observe the ways in which that actually shows up in your life. So the next part, how do we create it for ourselves? Now, this is a really important section because when you know the ways in which you create emotional burnout for yourself, you'll also know the antidote, of course. In observing the genesis of the problem without judgment, you find the solution to it. Now, Just letting you know, I might get emotional while talking about this. I definitely cried while I was writing this list out, remembering all the times in my life when I tortured myself and treated myself horribly for all kinds of ridiculous reasons. Okay, so how do we create emotional burnout for ourselves? We set and obsess over arbitrary goals that have much more to do with us trying to earn approval from others than with us actually following our intuition and guidance and our true desires. We don't recognize our accomplishments. We are cruel to ourselves. We refuse to forgive ourselves. We believe that we're responsible for much more than we really are. We avoid taking responsibility for the very small number of things that are actually ours to take care of. We wait for others to tend to our well-being, and we resent them or feel worthless when they don't. We have unrealistic, painful, non-compassionate expectations of ourselves. We have impossible expectations of ourselves, like having expectations of ourselves that necessitate that we harm ourselves in order to meet them. I want to pause here just for a minute to go into this a little bit deeper. One of the ways that I want you to engage with this episode, again, is through writing an answer to this question. What expectations do I have of myself that require that I harm myself in order to meet them? Just sit with that for a little bit. I'm going to say it again because it needs to be said again and again and again until we stop choosing to harm ourselves in pursuit of arbitrarily decided goals. So again, what expectations do I have of myself that require that I harm myself in order to meet them? I don't know what this looks like for you. I don't know where this manifests in your life, but if you're listening up until this point in the episode, if you are resonating with what I'm saying here, I guarantee you that there are areas in your life where you have expectations of yourself that require you to harm yourself in order to meet them. And I promise you that you non-judgmentally observing what those are, observing where those are, where that's coming up for you, and being really honest with yourself about that is going to be the most powerful thing you could do all week long for your well-being. This might be in relationships. This might be with your physical health, with your weight. This might be in familial relationships. This might be with your job, in your career. I don't know. But I'll just speak from personal experience. I, at various points throughout my life, had an expectation of what my weight would be or what my body would look like that actually required me to engage in disordered eating patterns, disordered exercising, disordered all kinds of stuff in order to reach it. In relationships, in romantic relationships, for example, I had an expectation of myself that I was able to, and that I was supposed to, quote unquote, save my partner in various ways. I mean, this manifested in all kinds of different ways. I was like, let me save you in any way that I can figure out how. And that, of course, led me to behave in ways that were at my detriment. I sacrificed myself in those ways. In familial relationships, I mean, honestly, the same thing, just cut and paste to family. So in whatever ways this shows up for you, please observe this with love and compassion and understanding, not with judgment, not with self-loathing, but just with love and gentleness and kindness, and write that down. Okay, next. We try to control everything, including other people and external events that we actually can't control. We believe our thoughts rather than observing them. We don't prioritize the way that we feel. We look to others for instructions on how to live, be, exist, and interact. We ask far too much of ourselves. We decide that for whatever reason, we aren't worthy of care from others or ourselves. Or we decide that we aren't worthy of care unless we are suffering, unless we have reached a point of exhaustion, unless we have completely depleted ourselves and truly can't take another step. Any of this. We don't give ourselves what we know deep down that we need. We don't ask for help or support from others or from God. We don't pray. We have a dangerously narrow perspective. So I want to touch on these last few before moving on. One of the ways in which I contributed to my emotional exhaustion in many different areas and in many different time periods in my life was by by not relying on God for support and by not praying. And I don't know how you define God or a higher power or source or the universe. It really doesn't matter. And I don't want us to get bogged down in the language of God, the universe, higher power, source, any of that. I don't. You really, I mean, if you're listening to this, and I don't want to exclude any atheists or agnostics from this conversation because it's so important. So please replace that with whatever you want. You can even replace it with science. If you are like truly an atheist who is purely like science, fact-based done, that's beautiful. I love that. So figure out a way that you can define that for yourself. Like maybe for you, it's, it wouldn't be that you pray and ask support from God, but it's that you trust in nature and in the cycle and flow of all things on earth. That is a way in which you can experience the effect that I experience when I pray, or when I thank God, or when I ask God for support. That's a way that you can experience that, even if you don't have the same experience as I do, believing in a God or a higher power. So I don't ever want atheists or agnostics or, people who don't feel comfortable speaking to God or believing in God or whatever. I don't want you to be excluded from this conversation of having true trust and surrender in a way that will help you heal from emotional burnout. Okay. I hope that all made sense. So, the last one, we have a dangerously narrow perspective. Okay. The way that this contributes to our emotional burnout is, and again, I'm speaking from personal experience here because I seriously deal with this every single day. Every single day I find myself stressing out or suffering or being in pain and despair and hopelessness because my perspective is so narrow, and I haven't taken the time to just take a breath and widen that perspective and have a more holistic look on my life and on the world and all of it. So when I say that having a dangerously narrow perspective contributes to emotional burnout, I mean when I have decided that right now is the end all be all, when I've decided that what is happening right now is going to always keep happening, when I've decided that it couldn't ever change, that the way that it is now is the way that it will always be, and that is terrible. That's what I mean, because that kind of thinking will have you feeling doom, and that kind of thinking will keep you so small and will keep your vision small and will also cause tons of pain for you because it's telling you the lie that nothing will ever change and that your perspective on things is the ultimate truth and is totally accurate, and that your nihilistic or fatalistic or whatever negative view on something is the ultimate truth. And it's just not. So I know for a fact that widening your perspective, that opening that window in your mind is always going to serve you and going to bring you out of doom, hopelessness, despair, regret, resentment, all of that. So that's my list. I mean, I could go on, but that list will do for now. And I'm sure by now, after me reading all of that, you've identified your own ways in which you exhaust yourself, harm yourself, and burn yourself out emotionally or physically or financially or whatever. And I hope that you've also realized that you don't have to make that choice any longer. And that leads us into our next section. How can we heal from emotional burnout and prevent it in the future? Of course, as you know, I'm going to tell you that this begins and ends with choice. This is about the way that you choose to move through the world. This is about the way that you choose to live your life. You can choose to live your life in a way that harms you, or you can choose differently. You can choose to ignore the signs that you need rest, tenderness, self-compassion, breath, sleep, water, fresh air, kindness. Or you can choose to ignore these signs and ignore these needs and treat yourself with cruelty, impatience, and coldness. And by the way, when I say kindness, I mean kindness from yourself. It really is your choice. So because I like lists and I also like powerful, effective processes that I can follow, I want to provide you with one here while also reminding you that you can and should totally DIY this. You should absolutely sit down with a cup of tea and a candle and a big hug for yourself. Yes, I highly recommend hugging yourself and holding your own hand. I do it all the time. It feels amazing. And write out your very own plan on how you're going to heal from and prevent emotional burnout. That said, here is my recipe for living a life that feels amazing and is free of emotional burnout. Number 1, compassionately observe how you're feeling. Number 2, ask why. Take responsibility without blame, just responsibility, pure and simple, and provide an answer. Number 3, tune into what you need with non-judgment and openness. Number 4, give it to yourself, prioritize it. So I want to touch on something before we wrap up this episode. In my notes for this episode, I wrote, you are not a math equation. And the reason why this is important to touch on right now is because when I was really beginning this process, when I was first dipping my little toe into the waters of not wanting to kill myself all the time. And I love joking about that because it's still a part of my experience and I'm just like, oh God. I remember when my suicidal thoughts had so much control over me and now they just don't, and it's the best. Oh my God, it's the best. Anyways, so I remember when I was on the beginning of that journey and I was constantly trying to figure out the thing. And of course, it wasn't me trying to go within and ask myself what I need. It was me looking outside at movies and magazines and shit and being like, well, okay, she is taking a bubble bath. Maybe I'll do that? ? Or okay, they talk about eating cake. Maybe I'll just eat and that'll make me feel better. I don't know. It was just this hilarious blindfold situation where I was just fumbling around in the dark because I wasn't listening to myself and I didn't even know that I could. I didn't know how to. So it was just, like I said, me fumbling around in the dark, trying to figure out a way to love myself, a way to feel better, a way to move out of emotional burnout. It was just hilarious. I mean, looking back now, I can laugh at it, but at the time it felt like death, obviously. So funny. So eventually, what I realized, of course, was that, okay, I'm an individual. There are ways in which I am individually causing myself emotional burnout and pain. There are ways that I am expecting myself to be superhuman. There are ways that I'm expecting things of myself that are really harmful. Let me look at those things. Let me ask myself what I actually need, not what this person in this TV show or this movie needed in her time of need. Let me actually tune in there. Let me actually listen. And let me just move forward with that awareness. Let me just experiment in that way. You are not a math equation. There isn't one little formula that you can plug in and fix your whole life. This is about the relationship that you build with yourself. This is about the way that you decide to interact with yourself moving forward and during times of stress and during times of pain and when you need support and all of it. This isn't about, okay, well, I'm just going to figure out my favorite Lush bath bomb and then I'll never feel stressed again. And if you have been caught in the cycle of consumerism, if you've been caught in the cycle of let me just figure out what I need to buy or consume that will make me whole and then I'll be good, and you just keep trying and consuming and buying and trying and whatever, and it you still feel empty or you still feel stressed or you still feel depleted, that ends now. That ends right now because you have those 4 questions that I just gave you and you're going to sit down and journal them and actually get to know yourself and you're not going to look outside for answers anymore, and you're going to go within, and you're going to get in touch with yourself, like, that cycle's over. I'm so happy to tell you that that cycle's over if you want it to be. That cycle's over if you want it to be. You're not a math equation. Just listen to yourself. That's how I want to end this episode. I love you all so much, and I hope that you know that you are so worthy of a life that you don't feel the need to escape from. You are so worthy of a life that feels good. You never, ever, ever need to measure your worth against how much pain you're willing to put yourself through. Never, ever, ever. Just breathe into that. I'm going to read that again. You never, ever need to measure your worth against how much pain you're willing to put yourself through. And the choice of whether or not to do that, just like your entire life, is entirely yours. Have a beautiful week. If you liked what you heard in this episode, join me over on Instagram at Codependent Millennial for more tips on how to move beyond codependency and build a life you truly love. To get more information about how to work with me one-on-one, visit codependentmillennial.com and click on the Work With Me button in the menu at the top.